Hello, welcome to another Black Horizons program. I'm your host, Hamid Rasheed. The decision by the Halifax County Bedford District School Board to amalgamate the Cole Harbour and Gordon Bell Senior High Schools has raised a number of questions. In today's program, we will discuss the reasons behind the decision to amalgamate and hopefully clarify a number of issues that have been raised. I have joining me on the program as my guest Mr. Don Trider, who is not the Don Trider who is the Chief of Police for the City of Dartmouth, but the Don Trider who is the Subsystem Supervisor of the Eastern
Suburban Subsystem.
Eastern Suburban Subsystem. That's quite a handle,
right.
Don. I have difficulty getting all that in one sentence. I want to welcome you back to the Black Horizons program. It seems that it's been a couple of years now since we've had you on the program. We were talking last about the situation in Robert Borden the last time I had you on.
Redistribution debate, that's right.
Right.
It's a pleasure to be back.
Right. Well, I think we should begin at the beginning, Don, and I'd like to ask you what was the background leading up to the decision to amalgamate the two schools?
Well, essentially, Hamid, the decision of the municipal councils to reduce the amount of excess costs funded by the council by $1.8 million prompted the district school board to look at a number of ways to achieve that reduction. One of the ways that they saw was to reduce the staff of the two high schools by 8 teachers through this consolidation or amalgamation, as we call it. It was attractive from the point of view that the reduction could be achieved with little, if any, change in the programming, the quality of programming that is offered to the students. Now, I guess we have to go back to the redistribution debate to fully appreciate the development of the idea. It was not an idea that came out of the blue, but one that has been given quite a bit of consideration in the past few years. When we finished the redistribution in 1978-79, we recognized that, and rightfully so, that the community was going to demand equal quality of education from the two high schools, which are situated in very close proximity. After our first year in operation, which took a lot of our time in monitoring that, we were aware that perhaps the curriculums in the two schools were beginning to diverge a little bit, that it was going to be extremely difficult to keep them in step. So we pursued various steps. We looked at several alternatives, and they were all of a consolidation nature, really, and one of them was the suggestion of an amalgamation of the two high schools. Now, in the meetings that we had with the students and with the trustees, we recognized that it would be necessary to have a series of public debates or public meetings in any event to review the proposal with the community. Now, keep in mind that this is really at that time, it was only 2 years after the intense sessions that we had with redistribution. So we felt that it was not the right time to take this to the communities, that we would opt for a common department head structure, and that was an administrative structure that would give us the curriculum consistency that we felt was necessary and would not alarm and would not affect directly the communities. And that has worked out quite successfully, I might say. We have a single department head for the two schools in each of the subject areas. Now, with the reduction in the budget and the need to save or to reduce staff, the idea comes to the forefront again. And it's imperative now that we do it. The choice really wasn't there. To save 8 staff positions and not affect programming was extremely attractive to the school board. I might use a little example to better demonstrate how the saving is achieved. The high school in Sackville, if we look at September 30th enrollment figures for last year, the high school in Sackville had a population of 1,300, and it had a staff complement of 73. Now, in our two high schools, we had a population of 1,212 to be precise, and our total staff complement was 84. In other words, it was taking us 11 more teachers to offer the same services to our students. And the reason for that is the two separate structures that we have. Whenever you have two of anything, then it's going to take more staff to provide the same service. So with the consolidation, with the grade 10s together in one building, the grades 11 and 12 in the other building, we could achieve a staff reduction of 8 and offer the same programs. The issue did arise prior to that, about 2 or 3 weeks prior to the budget reduction, in a meeting of secondary principals when we were looking at the locating of the intermediate industrial program within our schools. Now, this is a pre-vocational program which students opt for, and it's been a long sought after program for our subsystem. But our space requirements were such that we would have had to locate it in a junior high school setting. The students who opt for these programs are traditionally of high school age, and we would want to keep them in a school setting which was compatible with their age group and their peer group. With the amalgamation, we can now do that, and we saw that at that time, just 2 weeks prior. We knew that if we consolidated the schools, we could put the industrial program at the high school level, but it wasn't thought about at that time beyond that. It was an idea. I joined discussions with the chief executive officer, indicated to him the reaction we would likely receive, and we concluded that perhaps it would be best simply to introduce the topic, have the board table it, and have the next school year to get public reaction. Let's get reaction from all communities, and then if it's deemed feasible, put it in place the following year. So we were prepared to do that and recognized the need to have that type of community input. But with this budget situation, things happened very, very quickly, and April 30th is an important date for us within the teaching profession, and there seemed to be major decisions being made almost daily at that time, and it's caused a lot of concern on the part of the parents that not enough time for community input was given to it. So that's a history of the development of the proposal. It's not a new proposal, and one that's been made more feasible with the budget reduction.
Well, a number of questions arising out of that, Don. When you talked about the 1.8, I believe it is, million reduction,
yes.
Is this a decision that was made by the county to cut back its budget? Was this because the county's budget overall for education had been cut back, or what led to the $1.8 million?
We have to look at the method of funding education within the district board to fully appreciate the difficulties there. And the school board budget, which would be approximately $70 million, is funded through the government, provincial government grant, which would be on a per pupil basis, the mandatory contribution by the municipal council under the Walker Commission. Each municipal council is required to contribute 38 cents per dollar towards education costs. And then we have what we call excess costs. And in the district board of Halifax County and Bedford, the excess costs are in the vicinity of $7 million. And after a lot of review and scrutiny by the school board and the councils of Bedford and Halifax County, it was decided that $5.8 million was the extent to which the municipal units would fund excess costs. So the board was left with a shortfall of $1.8 million, and it was necessary to go through every aspect of the board's budget in order to achieve that reduction, and indeed they have. Staffing, we've reduced staff. There's our maintenance budget, our conveyance budget, our special education. All of those will have received scrutiny and will receive scrutiny in the near future in order to spread the effect of the $1.8 million throughout the entire school board budget. It's very difficult in a school board to achieve a reduction of $1.8 million. The bulk of our costs are associated with contractual items, teacher salaries, for instance, and many of those are locked into contracts which extend through to July 31st. So there's nothing that can be done in this period of time, and you're compressing the $1.8 million into almost a 5-month time frame in order to achieve it. which makes it that much more difficult.
Hmm. Well, would it be correct to say, though, that it, even without the $1.8 million reduction in costs, that the direction that the schools were going in seemed to be in the area of amalgamation in any event? It's just that the reduction expedited the decision
Exactly.
to proceed.
That's correct. And the proposal would have been tabled and would have been out for public reaction during the next school year in any event. That was the direction we were heading.
Right. In commenting on one of the reasons behind the decision to amalgamate, you mentioned that there was some divergence in curriculums that was starting to take place between the two schools. I'm curious as to how that came about, given the fact that in the last year, when you had the combined department heads and so on, what would explain the divergence in the curriculums?
Well, when I mention diversion, the divergent nature of the curriculums, I'm taking it back the year prior to the common department head structure.
I see.
When we had separate department heads.
Yes.
In the two schools. Now this year we've come a long way in getting those curriculums together. Mm-hmm. We have a social studies department head submitting common course outlines for each of the subject areas in both schools. A single course outline.
Right.
There's commonality all the way through. So we've been able to bring that together nicely this year.
Right. Okay. Now, you've explained in the reason why there wasn't possible to have public input at this particular stage, basically because of the decisions that were being made around the budgets and so on. I understand, however, that representations have been made to the school board to review and to reconsider this decision. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us something about the reservations that are being expressed by the various people that are affected, the students and the
Sure.
community?
Well, since the decision was made, we've held a number of meetings. Our first priority was to get to the students and to fully explain the situation to them and attempt to reduce their fears about the whole thing. And the first few days were spent in talking to all of the grade 9 students who will be grade 10s next year, and the 11s and 12s. Now, we did have quite a reaction from the students in the first couple of days, particularly students from the Gordon Bell Senior High School. Now, it's very much an emotional issue, because I think if I look at it from their point of view, they have perhaps more to lose, if we want to put it that way, than anybody else. In fact, their school identity will disappear. There won't be a Gordon Bell Senior High School, nor will there be a Cole Harbour Senior High School. And they've worked hard at developing school spirit over the past couple of years. They have school jackets and all of the other things that we had when we were at high school and we could identify with. And there's a sense of loss that is associated with the amalgamation and the renaming of a single high school structure. So that essentially is the reason. I consider it to be a short-term emotional reaction, because hopefully at some point the students, whether they be in grade 7 or 8 right now, will come into this new high school structure, and its school spirit will develop. They will have their school jackets, their school teams, and that same strong feeling about the school will develop again. Mm-hmm. So I think that summarizes the feelings of the students. The parents, the reaction varies, and the parents don't dwell specifically on any disadvantages that they see in the structure. They seem to dwell mostly on the fact that it was done without their consultation and without their input, which we didn't have time for. And in addition, the communities, particularly the black communities, are concerned about change. They've undergone change in the education system to quite a degree over the years, and you have to fully understand the historical development of education within the black communities to appreciate the reasons for their concern. And they see themselves as just having had a change in the redistribution debate. I guess they received, and all communities received, some assurances that maybe that would be the last change. But here we are again through this budget reduction, the need for a sudden change again. And that's where I see the most of the complaints lying in that area. The request from the black community was to just shelve it for a year so that we could evaluate its consequences. But of course, really the budget situation does not permit us to do that. We have no alternatives, really. We could not hire back the 8 teachers, or we could not increase our staff allotment by 8 because the funds aren't there. And to have the board reduce our current situation by 8 staff members would severely restrict our programming. And we would have to reduce programs and increase class size if they were to do that. So in this proposal, we have the reduction, and we have the maintenance of the same number and the quality of programs that we've had this year.
Well, now, you mentioned about the number of changes that particularly the black community in the area has been subjected to as a result of trying to get the whole situation sorted out with the schools in this particular system. Do you feel that this has had any adverse impact on the education of the children?
I think not. I think the changes, and I have a feeling for the effect of the change and the historical development of education. But the changes, as I evaluate them, have been for the benefit of education of all communities, the education of students in all communities, including the black community. The last redistribution debate was necessitated through the construction of a new high school. We had to determine a student composition for each school. Now, with that in place, our programming increased substantially. We had business education in for the first time. We had honors courses developed. We had a full range of programming. So while there was change there, it certainly produced benefits and increased opportunities for all students, and we can point to that. Certainly we feel this change is going to have educational benefits. There are benefits budget-wise, there's no question about it. But we mustn't lose sight of the fact that educationally this is sound. It allows us to get our intermediate industrial program in. It allows us to make best use of our resources for each grade level. We can consolidate our resources at each grade level. And we can go on and list other advantages. So the changes have been to the benefit of all students.
Right.
But I can appreciate that there's something here in schools being taken out of the black communities over the years, and then they not only have to be bused to schools outside the community, but even then they get caught in the growth areas where that has stimulated further change, and there's a sense of instability.
Right.
No
well,
stability.
The constant movement would kind of keep things unsettled.
That's right.
It would at least create an atmosphere of unsettledness.
And I think in that case you tend to lose sight of the benefits that may come from the various changes, and somehow perceive that with all this change going on, the quality of education must be decreasing. Of course, we can point to the fact that is not the case.
Right. Well, that's a topic for another program in terms of the quality of education as it relates to the black community in that particular area. But one specific area that I'm concerned about, it's been I think it's the black literature program that is taught in one of the schools. Questions have been raised as to whether or not this program will be lost in this amalgamation. Can you give any assurances in terms of what the fate of that community or that project or program will be?
No, that course, the black literature, will be offered next year. We've had the other evening I met with the principal, Mr. O'Coin, and we were looking at courses and teachers to teach the courses, and certainly black literature will be offered, and we have the teacher in place, and assuming that a number of students opt for it, then it will not suffer. There'll be no program reductions, and including black literature.
It's also been suggested that, and I think perhaps this may be added to by this feeling of constant movement that we were talking about earlier, that some members of the black community feel that this is yet another attempt to segregate the black community. Could you deal with that comment?
Well, one of the principles that we had back in in 1978 was the integration principle, and it was officially adopted by the board at that time. And if we review that particular principle in terms of this amalgamation, we find, in our opinion, that integration is enhanced through this proposal. We have students from all communities right across our subsystem coming together, from Eastern Passage through to Preston, and it will the school composition will reflect to a better degree the composition of the total subsystem population. The concern seems to be that with a larger proportion of black students concentrated in one school, or let's say one grade level, grade 10, that there is a greater chance that all black classes will develop. And once again, I have to say that will not happen. The classes are made up based on computer selection, really. If there's 100 students, if there are 100 students who have opted for English,
yes,
then the computer will fill up the classes until they get to the size, 25, 26, whatever we set it at. And we will check to make sure that they are integrated in a way that the proportion of black students and white students reflects the proportion of the total school population. Individual subjects, and that will not be many, there may be one particular subject where we could find a proportion of black students higher than what the school population represents. Any classes of that nature are established through the consent of the students, the consent of the parents, and the full awareness of the parents of what the class composition will be. So that will not happen. That we should not find classes with a disproportionate number of black students. We feel that with the coming together of the two black communities or three black communities, student-wise, and all of the classes reflecting that total student composition from the three communities, that a very healthy situation will exist.
So the principle of integration is still very much alive and well.
Very, very much.
Right. I think a lot of people would be pleased to hear that. Well, I want to shift to a little broader situation now, Don, if I might. The Walker report on education, financing of education, seems to be having a lot of impact. We hear about the situation of the teachers in Cape Breton and so on. What do you think the long-term impact of this report will be? Will we see more teacher cutbacks? And I'm particularly interested in terms of what you think the impact of this might be on black teachers. Many of them, of course, are just new to systems, just coming in and so on, and we're just starting to see black teachers being represented at various levels of the education system. What do you think the future holds?
Well, you have to understand that my response comes from just some casual reading, although close reading of the whole Walker Commission and the debates that have been going on. It's hard to say whether we've seen the bottom line reached in this or not. In most cases, right now, the budget, in our case, the budget has depended on the ability of municipal councils to fund excess costs. It's very difficult to get into that and to stay away from blaming this group or that group, and I don't want to take that on at all. But with the current levels of funding, in our case, it will depend on municipal councils picking up excess costs. Of course, if the provincial government funds to a higher level, then that puts municipal councils in a better situation. So we come up from there. The effect, so it may be that more cutbacks are in the offing. It's hard to say. The effect on black teachers, it depends on the level of experience of the black teachers. With the teachers that we have in the Eastern Suburban subsystem, many of them are permanent contract teachers. I do not see a situation where they will be affected. It would have to be a drastic situation for them to be affected. And you see, in Halifax County, Bedford, we have the advantage of growth in Cole Harbour and growth in Sackville. And we've never had to lay off teachers. We always achieve any reductions through attrition, through normal attrition. And we hope that will continue. In the event that we do have to reduce staff, we would be looking at probationary teachers first, or first-year probationary teachers. And of course, if there are young black students who are graduating from Teachers College or the universities and coming in, then it's not too promising. And it's not promising for any teachers coming in. Even if they land a job as a first-year probationary teacher, they can't be too confident that that job will be in place at the end of the next year.
But those in the system now, your guess that they're fairly...
Oh, yeah. In our board, yes. Now, you take the North Side Victoria board, where the problems have been in the past few days. I suspect that they would not have the degree of growth that we have. Consequently, they may not have hired a lot of new teachers over the years, and they are having to terminate teachers with 5 and 6 years experience, permanent contract teachers.
Yes.
And the union's position, I believe, is that this is contrary to their perception of an agreement that was reached with the department, whereby no permanent contract teachers would be laid off.
Mm-hmm.
So, for boards in a situation where they have not been achieving growth, it could be very unsettling. Very unsettling.
Now, you mentioned that it's been the policy to try to absorb the teachers or use attrition as a means of preventing laying off. The 8 teachers, I believe you mentioned, are going to be lost as a result of the amalgamation. Are they going to be absorbed, or are they going to be laid off?
No, hopefully they'll be absorbed. We had I think only 2 or 3 resignations, so we have 5 others. Now, some of those are first-year probationary teachers, and they would have been terminated at this point, along with other secondary first-year probationary teachers.
Any blacks in that group?
There would have been, yes. In the Eastern Suburban subsystem, there are 2 black teachers in that group. Now, we have had to do this before, and if the same thing happens as in previous years, they will be rehired. And so far, in my discussions with the superintendent for personnel with regard to staffing, it appears as though those teachers are going to be taken back on. And particularly with the 2 black teachers we have, because of the specialized nature of their assignment. Mm-hmm. One was a physical education and the other was in a special class placement. So it looks good from that point of view.
Right. Well, now, I understand, we only have a minute or so left, but I understand that there has been some agreement on the part of the board to consider a request that has come forward from the black community. Is that true in terms of postponing the decision, or what is the status
well,
of that?
Well, not the request was a 2-pronged request.
Yes.
First, to shelve it for a year and to evaluate its consequences. I would say it's not likely that's going to happen.
Yeah.
No motions were made at that board meeting, and,
yes.
and that was that. But the second point that the community made, which pleased me in a way, was to either, I think, broaden the scope of the monitoring committee that's in place with the view of monitoring the implementation of this amalgamation.
I see.
And to share the concerns of the black community and to make sure these were taken into consideration during that whole period of implementation. And I look forward to the participation of that committee as we move into this amalgamation.
Right. I didn't ask you, what are you going to call the new complex?
Well, we don't have a name. You know, we had a name in a report called the Eastern Suburban Academic Center, mm-hmm. and that did not win too many votes. So I think what we're going to do is try to get some student involvement in mm-hmm. this and have proposals come from the students, possibly submit 2 or 3 alternatives to the school board or county council, whatever, and have the name arrived at through that means. It's my hope that the name will be one that all students can identify with, that it does not name one of the specific communities that we have. We could identify 5 or 6 specific communities, but that it is one that all students can relate to and feel proud of and be a part of. And mm-hmm. our planning of the last few days leads us to be very, very optimistic about the success of this whole thing.
Well, Don, I want to thank you for being our guest. We've exhausted our time. Hopefully our program has been able to clarify and answer some of the questions about the school amalgamation.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching our program. Join us next week. welcome to another Black Horizons program. We're glad that you could join us. I'm your host, Hamid Rasheed. In today's program, we'll be talking about the developing countries of Africa in the international economic system. From May 11th to the 14th of this year, the Canadian Association of African Studies held its 12th annual conference at the University of Toronto. And one of the papers that was presented as part of that conference was a paper that addressed the question of the developing countries of Africa and the international economic system. We have joining us on the program today Celestine Bassey of the Political Science Department at Dalhousie University, and we'll talk to him about the main issues that were raised in this paper. Celestine, welcome back to the Black Horizons program.
Thank you very much.
I think it's very appropriate that we have this program at this particular point in time, in that by the time this program is aired, the economic summit of all of the major nations of the world will have been in progress, if not finished. So I think our topic today is hopefully going to prove to be a timely one. I'd like to ask you about the conference that was held at the University of Toronto in the middle of May. What role did you play in that conference?
Yeah, actually the conference was a multidisciplinary conference, covering areas, in the social sciences and humanities, ranging from geography, history, to political science and economics. And, the conference was divided into various workshops. Some certain workshops were devoted to the international relations, of African states, which of course includes their international political economy, and military strategic issues, and issues relating to agricultural processes and production. I was a discussant on two papers that were presented, relating to the issues of international economic system and its relation to African states. In other words, the relation of the economies of African countries, to the international economic system. And as we noted, that there are certain trends which is no longer deniable, that what happens in many domestic economies, all over the world, is actually also affected, by what the structural order, of the international system. And it is very much demonstrated now, where, for instance, the Canadians are being very much told that, the interest rate in Canada, has not only to be blamed, on the governmental policies in Canada. They just have to look across the border and see what is happening in the United States. And I guess this is the same thing, with Britain and other industrial countries of the West. And hence, one of the major points of the discussion, presently at Brussels, in France, So the central theme is that, the economies of various countries is not a closed system, that forces within the international system do affect these economies. Of course, then you can't also deny that, the governmental economic strategies may either augment, or mitigate, the impact of these international forces on the economy of the various countries. And this is exactly what we are experiencing in African countries in the present contemporary international system. Okay.
Well, now, one of the papers that you were discussing in was the paper prepared by Dr. Osoba, I believe, of Nigeria. And as we mentioned in our introductory program, it had to do with the relationship of African countries in the international economic order. What were the main issues that were raised in Dr. Osoba's paper?
Yeah, Dr. Osoba's paper, well, to start with, Dr. Osoba is a research, she's a research fellow with the Nigerian Institute of Economic Research, at Ibadan University, and we're quite glad to have had her at the conference, at Toronto. She actually presented a paper, addressing itself, to the patent economic, the palpable, I may say, economic situation prevailing in most African countries. In her paper, she did try to isolate, some of the structural problems, both at the domestic level and international level, that has contributed, or underscored, the present underdevelopment of the economies of many African states. In other words, her paper was actually addressed, to the paradox, that had actually, concerned many African scholars, not only African, but scholars from the developing countries, especially Latin American scholars, who have been very much in the forefront of what we call the dependency revolution, in political economy. The paradox is that why is it that countries like Africa are so rich in terms of mineral resources and potential market, but at the same time they're so marginal, poor, so rich at the same time so poor, in terms of actual economic situation. So it was this this paradox that I think Dr. Suba's paper was addressed to, and I was glad to be the discussant of that particular paper in the particular workshop that we had.
Well, what were some of the structural concerns that were isolated?
Yeah, well, she did isolate, for instance, at the international level, the role of such international regimes, as the International Monetary Fund, and also that of trade cartels, that had existed in the developing country. That the developing, it was only with OPEC that especially people in the West came to think that, came to know about the role of a cartel in the international economic system. But unfortunately, not many people know that, the developing country had all along smarted, under, the operation of cartels in the Western world. For instance, coffee from Uganda, for instance, is not, yes, the price of coffee export, from Uganda is not set by the Ugandan government. It's set by a cartel based in London. It's the same thing applying to gold, whether from Ghana or any part of Africa, or copper, from Zambia or Zaire. The prices of these products are not set by the government of this country. Mm-hmm. They are set by the consumers, by especially, the government of industry, the cartel, which operates in favor of the government of the industrialized West. So, for instance, if Uganda should unilaterally set a price on its coffee, this cartel will immediately boycott it. So, because of that, of the threat of embargo that is always present and existent about goods coming from developing countries like Africa to the Western world, if there's any unilateral, demand on the part of this government, about, the pricing of their goods, this good would be automatically, would be automatically embargoed. So, to the disadvantage. So it has been the same thing. It was only in recent times that the inelasticity, of products like oil, allows the OPEC country, to take control of the pricing, especially, to be able to confront, the all-powerful multinational corporation, that has so much dominated the oil market, and passed huge profits, if not low pricing, to the industrialized countries. So these were the structural problems that she touched upon, also including trade, IMF, and the multinational corporation. At the domestic level, which to a very great extent I did agree with her. She pointed out, the structural problems involving the inequities, in unequal distribution, of the wealth of these countries. Example was made of Nigeria, for instance, which I know very much because I'm a Nigerian. Yes. This is a country that have grown so rich, in recent times in terms of income. But again, it is only the few within the society that actually benefited. Although the government has done a lot, in terms of social infrastructures, communications, schools, hospitals, but again, the permanent distribution pattern, or structures, to allow, the wealth of the country to trickle down to the to the masses, or the man in the streets, as they put it, was simply not there. So then she also did indicate in terms of indices, that could convey, the graphic backwardness, of these countries, and things relating to the GNP of many African countries, yes, which actually, varied from $100, in a place like Chad, one of the Sahel countries that had so much been devastated by years of drought, and internal civil strife, to countries, like Nigeria itself, that has boasted, at least in recent times, huge GNP, which to a certain extent is surpassed that of Canada in very much recent times, although things are now going back to square one. She did point to something like level of production. Nigeria is a very good example. In spite of the fertile grounds, it appears to me that the economic planners, of the 60s, maybe because of the Civil War, for instance, had to a certain extent overlooked the agricultural sector. And now with the booming population, which is nearing the 100 million mark, then you find that Nigeria has to spend more than 2.5 billion every month importing food, just food. So you can see then that that food, for instance, had been a problem. The level of food production is also the same thing with the level of literacy, as she pointed out, because no economy can prosper without skilled manpower. And we all, of course, know that it has been part and parcel of many colonial powers, like the Portuguese especially, and the Belgian, to deny African countries to where their colonies like Congo, Zaire, and Angola and Mozambique, to deny them education. In fact, in the Belgian Congo, an African would be fortunate to have any education beyond the primary school level, because this government were quite aware of the fact that revolutionaries from time had been found among the intellectuals, that if any group at all is going to overthrow the colonial regime, is going to be the educated one. We saw that in the United States, for instance, it was the Jeffersons that led the revolution against the British. And in Soviet Union, it was the Lenin, and Lothar Rosenberg of Germany, and other Marxists. These were highly educated people. So the colonial powers knew very well that if they're ever going to perpetuate for any long their colonial domination of African countries, they have to deny them at all cost education. So this is why the Belgians, for instance, clamped down on Africans who wanted to have any education beyond the primary level. While in countries like Angola and also Mozambique, it was estimated that less than 1% of the total population had any education beyond the primary school level. That's they call the assimilados, those that the Portuguese and also the French did give special favor. The British are not excluded, because all the colonial powers were well aware that the troublemakers actually came from the educated class. So everything was done, to prevent missionaries from establishing school. There's, to prevent rich, indigents of the colonial to move forward in terms of education of their people. So because of that, taking the example of a country like Nigeria, which in terms of population was nearing almost the 60 million mark in 1960, only gained independence with just one university college, of even less than 2,000. But it is to the credit of the government that between 1960 and 1982, Nigeria could boast of almost 20 universities, could boast also of other high education, high institution of learning. So, the infrastructures are there, but it takes some time to train manpower, to meet the population need. And this is why many of these countries like Nigeria so much had to rely on import of expatriates, to teach in schools, to work at the hospitals, in order to augment, the skilled manpower in these particular countries.
Right.
So these are the structural problems at the domestic level, including, of course, the personalistic and corrupt dictatorships, you find in Africa, like Mobutu of Zaire, which unfortunately, who could have been overthrown by now, but who only existed, to the extent that it did behind the fortress of the rapid intervention force of the French and the Belgians, who are now situated on that territory. So, of course, you can say that as long as Mobutu is there, the Zairean economy will be in shambles. But the Zaireans could not overthrow Mobutu because of the interest of the West. After the Sheba province, that it was the American Air Forces that carried in the Moroccans and the French and the Belgians that went in. The whole disturbing episode about this type of intervention to perpetuate, a dictator that everybody knows, even reading from the British press, has diverted almost fortunes from his country to Swiss bank and other banks in Europe, has earned a fortune, is that the West, rather than thinking about the human misery created in Zaire, for instance, by Mobutu's policy, only thinks about its economic the economic interest in Zaire, because they are the ones that own virtually the major industries. It is the Western multinational, and to that extent, as one American general actually did say, that's Butler, that the problem with the Americans and the West is that, first it is their business, then it is the flag, and then thirdly, the soldiers will have to go in and defend the flag, and the business. So it is this vicious cycle that we are now seeing on African continent today. And until such blatant intervention is broken, then the future for many African countries like Zaire is particularly bleak. So all these structural problems are the problems that Dr. Suburban isolated in her paper, which I did agree with her to a certain extent.
Would it be fair, from what I've heard you say, would it be fair to make the statement that the major the economic system of the West, rather, it really depends on its future depends upon the continued ability to be able to destabilize and to exploit the developing countries of the third world, particularly Africa? Is that a fair statement in your opinion?
Well, to a certain extent, it is, yes. I mean, this is quite the logic and also the contradictions, within any economy that is export-oriented, whether you might call it capitalist economic system, In such a system, whatever there are certain demands of the industries, in such an economic system. They have to get a source for raw materials, and also they have to get a market, for the finished products, And, as we are seeing now, that in the expansion of the economic systems of the West, they have relied. I mean, this is what imperialism was all about. Go out there and find a market, for your goods, and also a source of raw materials. To a certain extent, you've actually been, I think, acquainted, with the debate, for instance, involving South Africa. There's almost a panic here in the West that, because of the huge dependence, of many Western countries on minerals coming from Southern Africa, that this economic imperative will have to override all consideration of human rights. So even if the South African racist apartheid, regime will want to kill 1 million Africans, which they've already killed, from the 50s to the present day, it is no concern of the West as far as the economic pipelines, lifeline is not in jeopardy. So there's a crisis here. The West, for instance, is, very, very, to a certain extent, alarmed, about the move of so many African countries towards socialist policy. But the actual fallacy here in this type of argument that's so because some of the African countries are going into the socialist camp, so because of that the business interests of the West, their raw materials, the source of raw materials and market is in jeopardy. The fallacy there is that look at what is happening now in African countries today. Take Angola and Mozambique, for instance, which are typical, socialist government. They're the ones who are doing business more, with the West, because this country will need the international currency, the dollar, for their balance of trade, and because of that, the oil, for instance, of Angola is exploited by the American Esso company, and most of the industrial hardware that Angola imports from the West, just because the Soviet economy is not directed towards an export, and import. So, but this is the basis of Western economy, and to that extent, many of these countries, irrespective of ideological orientation, still trade with the West. But these countries also do realize that if they have to move towards expedite their development policy, there have to be a central coordination, and there have to be an ideological undertone, that mobilizes the masses and bring the peasants, especially, to be involved, in the economic process. And apart from that, they are also aware of the fact that the whole system that had kept them oppressed throughout the colonial period, and also after even liberation, through the backdoor game that we now call neo-colonial policy, is very much tied to capitalism. So if, for instance, now that the system you fought, for your freedom is the same system you want to embrace, to perpetuate your national existence, then you are going to create a sort of contradiction that we've seen in countries like Nigeria now, who after independence went wholesale, towards, the capitalist part. I'm not against capitalism because I believe that, there are certain things, especially the incentives, that it offers to individuals, who have the skills and the capital. But at the same time, the socialist ideology, has to a certain extent created awareness among the leadership about the need of the masses. This is what had been very much lacking in those countries like Nigeria, who had all out pursuit, of capitalist policy, and there had been a complete neglect of the masses, of the peasantry, which is now coming to the fore in forms of social mobilization, in these particular countries. So, in direct answer to your question, yes, that as far as the economic interest of the Western capitalist countries is concerned, it is still to their interest, for them to perpetuate, the sort of neo-colonialist policy of, of seeing to the fact that, their access, to the minerals on African continent is safe, and to a certain extent being in the forefront of the market in these countries. And this is what we see within the contradictions, in the foreign policy of the United States and Canada, for instance. Canada, for instance, who even before the United States supported Britain in sanction, over the Falkland. But when it came to Namibia, Canada told African countries, well, our economy is such that we cannot afford, to bring any sanction to bear on South Africa. But why? It's because of the economic interests of South Africa, of Canada in Southern Africa, and secondly, that the victims of the South African racist apartheid are blacks, not whites. But in the case of Falkland, they were descendants of Britain. Hence, the whole contradiction that you see in Canadian policy and those of all Western countries, which has so much created, hostility between what we now call the North and South. The North especially referring to the Western capitalist system of countries.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, I'm interested in getting your opinion in terms of what is required to deal with these difficulties. And it seems to me that the United States, we talked earlier about Western interests, but from the last year's Cancun discussions, I think it's obvious to me, and I think many people have made the point that really what we're talking about here is the United States. The United States really plays the key role in this whole thing. What do you think has to be done to sort of to break this stranglehold that the United States has on the international system?
Well, it's the dominant position of the United States in the present economic situation has to be seen within its historical context, because after the Second World War, out of all the protagonists of the conflict, it was the U.S. territory that was virtually untouched, and the U.S. benefited most during the Second World War by the huge gigantic industry and the exports of the United States industry, which was actually geared towards to meet the war effort. So after the Second World War, then the U.S. was quite in a dominant position to structure the international economic system to its own image, and it actually did it. Organization like the United Nations organization is almost an organization that was created to perpetuate the interests of the victors. I mean, look at those who have vetoes now in the United Nations. It is dominantly the Western countries. And it's the same thing with the International Monetary Fund, which the IMF, which is not involved in giving credit, to countries of the international system. And this was created at Dumbarton Oaks by the victorious countries of the West especially. And to that extent, they gave themselves, enough votes to block policies that they are not going to be inimical to the interest. And such policies will be policies, for instance, that would favor developing countries, trying to gain the capital, for their own development. A typical example is when McNamara, for instance, was retiring, from the World Bank. He did appeal to especially the Western nations, to expand the credit loan, of developing countries from about 12 million to 30 billion, in about 1985. And that could be easily done, without damage to the ratios, interest that we now have in the International Monetary Fund. But this, of course, was as you now say, rejected outright. And of course, the dominant position of the United States in the International Monetary Fund has allowed the U.S., to manipulate, the government, especially of developing countries. We saw the case of man in Jamaica because he followed a socialist path which he deemed necessary, to ameliorate, the glaring economic situation, discrepancies, within Jamaica. While the Carter administration interpreted it as being a situation that is moving towards another Cuba, within the operational waters of the United States. And what the Carter administration did was to bring pressure to bear on the International Monetary Fund to withhold loans to Jamaica. And that sort of almost strangled the economy of Jamaica that eventually saw Manley out of power. So these are the type of situation we're talking about. Most countries of the world, even including developed European countries, depend on the IMF. Even the war now that Britain has got himself involved, somebody has to back up Britain, in order to stabilize its credit, and the United States has done that. Unlike 1956, when Britain and France and Israel attacked Nasser, Suez Canal, and all the U.S. had to do was to manipulate the currency of Britain and brought Britain to France on its heels. So the present financing of the war now is based, on the backing of the U.S. So then you can see how, perpetuated interests of the West could be used, to manipulate countries, of developing countries by perpetuating their interests through international organization. Well, various suggestions have been made, about, there's possibility of getting these countries out of such a stranglehold, but it's very difficult, like a suggestion has been made about an international currency that could replace the dollar. No U.S. government will agree to that because we of course know, the perpetuation of the dollar as the dominant international currency has done to the U.S. in terms of the U.S. interest, like a few countries could have got out of the mess of Vietnam so early in terms of the disastrous economic costs other than the U.S. All the United States had to do was to expand its currency, print more dollars, to finance the war. So in that case, and the U.S. went off the gold standard in order to give many countries no choice at all but to remain on the dollar. So this is exactly, the type of positive advantages that the U.S. derived from perpetuating the dollar as the international currency, and it's not going to give up without a fight. So we are really talking about a vicious circle here and a very serious situation, except of course, if the present domestic contradiction as a result of recession, brings maybe a socialist-oriented government to the United States, which should be rolled out in a recent future. But it was the same with France, that government may be more amenable, but with the government like Reagan, which is totally, whose policy is totally confrontationist, I don't really see that in the immediate future that some alternatives could be created, for the present international regimes, like the law of the sea. It is only the United States that finally defected out of all the countries of the world that participated. We saw also about, the World Health Organization, when all the doctors of the world who participated in the conference, to minimize, the damage that had been done to many babies in the third world as a result of the aggressive advertisement policy involving the use of bottled milk for babies. It was only the United States. And because of that, the delegate even of the United States forcefully resigned because he could not think that what his government, that's the present government of Reagan, was doing was morally right. So as long as you really have such a center of power in the United States, the future is bleak. So the only solution is that these countries will have to depend more on ameliorating situations within their domestic economy to the extent that they could.
Well, now you have a situation where the deck is stacked, so to speak. The United States really has the power in all of the existing forums to be able to call the shot, so to speak. If it doesn't like what's going on, it can simply withdraw or veto.
Yeah.
Given that the crisis that we see in now with most of the capitalistic countries and economies and so on, what is your prognosis for the future? Will it get worse before it gets better? Or will this malaise that's now in the economic system gradually lead us into a socialistic, more socialistic kind of outlook?
Well, I would not rule out that totally. While, for instance, Reagan's government is fearing, Soviet expansionism, I think they should rather look back home, to ward off, this sort of ideological orientations, that they're trying to throw a dam against. I mean, we see the case of France. Now, the socialist government came to power through a democratic process. We've seen the case of Greece. So it may be the same thing that if the present trend in the economies of the United States continues, you can't rule out the fact that a more social-oriented government might eventually come to power because,
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off in the middle of it. I'm getting frantic signals that we've exhausted our time. Maybe we'll come back and we'll continue this discussion on another time. That's our program for today. Thank you for watching.